A Whale of Stars by James A. Moores. Prologue. In the beginning there was darkness. No planets, no suns, no stars, not a mote of dust. Not even an arrow for time to follow through the cosmos. It was neither cold nor warm because those concepts hadn't yet begun. There was nothing, save darkness. Darkness is not nothing. Darkness is the absence of something. It can only exist when there is light to be an absence, and before there was everything, there was darkness, and a single solitary light which glowed a soft red. The singularity. If you could have seen it, you might have said it was red and shaped like a drop of blood. It glowed softly, but the light went nowhere, for the concept of time did not yet exist, and so the light kept to itself and let the darkness surround it. The singularity contained everything there ever was, and everything there ever would be. You might have thought it should be white, made up of all light and all energy at one time, but it spun so fast it redshifted, and the bright white turned to red. Nobody yet to this day knows why the singularity broke. Maybe it spun itself to death. Maybe that arrow of time had finally reached it and finally shattered its existence. Maybe a god reached down a benevolent hand from somewhere outside. They looked down from some great heaven and saw the red-shifted drop of blood. Perhaps they reached out a hand, or willed with pure energy to caress it and to give it all the possibilities of themselves a reality by the whisper of their word. Maybe the universe gave itself life, the great spirit of existence itself yearning to be free of its red prison. Perhaps rolling dice with the universe is a simple and inexorable, inescapable truth. There is no way of knowing, no way of understanding. It simply is. It is simply a beginning. The singularity, that spinning red drop, erupted in a silent explosion of radiation and existence. It rushed across the darkness. With the light of the singularity extinguished, not even darkness existed, for there can be no darkness without light. For the newly formed universe was not nothing. It would never be nothing. In place of the blood drop was now the building blocks of existence. A great dark age devoid of light and life, swirled atoms, elements, quarks, gluons, and protons, electrons floating in the remains. Now there was time. You would be remiss in thinking that the Dark Age would last forever, but it didn't. As with all violence, the birth of the universe came out misshapen and ugly. Whirls of gravity coalesced the newly formed atoms and the first elemental gases into the first stars, and with the arrow now coursing and pulsing through existence, light took its rightful place as king. The light exploded across the new universe, and in the corners of existence returned the darkness. The stars whirled around each other, forming galaxies and birthing their own followers, the planets, and then their moons. Some quaked in hellfire, others brightened into oases of green and blue. Two of these worlds birthed terrible secrets. One birthed intelligence that huffed and pushed at its existence. It grew into itself and rose from the dirt to eventually leave its cradle world behind. It was a hard journey, slow and plodding, as light would have no master but itself. And an intelligence found the second terrible secret: immortality. And with that in hand, the universe opened itself. Light, darkness, and even time bowed to its new kings. Intelligence worked its way into every corner faster and faster, an exponential growth spreading thin, but in a tight web that cast itself across all existence. Intelligence craves order, and so the thin expanse formed itself into an empire, It cast itself across as much space as it could, and in places it could not spread, it burned in violence. It ruled by the tenets of its faith, and be damned to hellfire all those who did not accept their rule. Death was shrugged off as a dream to a waking people. There was only the church. There was only the empire. There was only the mission. There was only the expansion. And time had no meaning. The arrow was broken at their feet, or so they thought. Salus felt old. He did not look old, but he was old. He didn't know how old. He only knew he looked young and felt young. Counting the number of years since his birth now seemed pointless. He might as well have been as old as the universe itself. Instead, he had decided to count the number of deaths he had caused, witnessed, or tried to stop. But this failed too. There had been far too many to keep count of. Eventually, he stopped counting altogether. He reached up and pushed down the neck of his uniform and idly caressed the scar at the base of his skull. It was time to stop pretending. He looked deeply at himself in the mirror of his small Spartan quarters. He had little belongings save for the old leather case he had pushed to the back of his room and a robe casually thrown onto the bed. He wore the dress uniform of a naval captain, all golds and deep dark blues. He kept his eyes square on himself and tried to ignore the case and the robe. He started to unbutton his military coat with the insignia of a captain of the cloth of the Empire, slowly peeling it away from his body. He kept the light in his quarters low, so it sent shadows cascading around the room. Despite this, as his fingers moved across the buttons, the golds of his uniform glittered around him in little pinpricks of light. The stars and bright gold cross was marked with a great red droplet of the Empire, a sigil of his captaincy. While he still carried the rank, he was no longer part of the Navy, but he would always feel it. It was a part of him. There was a chime at the door. Salus glanced over at it and then turned back to the mirror. "Come," he said in a soft voice. The door slid open, and a young ensign looked in. Sheepishly, he stepped over the door's bulkhead and stood to attention in the small quarters. The ensign probably was young, but Salus knew youth was a relative term. Nobody looked old, and you could never tell if someone was actually young or just a couple of 1,000 years removed. Salus smiled, despite his unease at their closeness. "Yes?" he asked gently, and as cheerfully as he could muster. "My lord captain, he stammered. Salus raised a gentle hand. "Friar, if you please." The ensign swallowed hard. "Yes, my lord friar." Salus smiled kindly, ignoring the twitch over his eye. "The Lord Captain would like you to know we are nearly at our destination and is beginning breaking burns." He saluted quickly and just stood there. "Your first time on ship?" Salus asked, smiling kindly. The ensign swallowed and nodded, letting his hand slowly ease its way down from his awkward salute. "You learn a ship. As long as I have been at sea, you learn the movement of the waves, the wind in her sails, and the power of her engines." He straightened the cord over his shoulder and pulled down at the uniform to pull it flush against his body despite the few undone buttons. "See? Wind?" He looked confused. "Sir?" Salus shook his head and kept his smile gracious. "Do you want to be a captain of the cloth one day, ensign?" Salus asked. The boy nodded quickly. "Oh, yes, sir, more than anything." "There are sacrifices during that road, ghosts that haunt you from the decisions you made, both right and wrong. It is a troubling road, and it will change you. It will break you down and rebuild you." Salus reached to his jacket and removed the captain's insignia, complete with his medals and nameplate. He brushed his fingers over it and looked down, seeing his reflection in the enamel of the red blood drop. The boy stood up taller. "I shall follow your example, my lord captain. I know all about the St. George. You rescued my home from the heretics. I watched you burn them." Salus sucked in a breath and steeled himself. He didn't know which planet the boy referred to. There were so many. There were too many. Such loss of life. And for what? He searched his thoughts, but found no answer. Seeing your address to us, it's why I signed up, sir, to bring order to the galaxy. He smiled and tried to stand up even taller. Salus smiled in return and stepped towards the ensign. Remember that all things break, my son. And as our Lord of Blood has taught us, forgiveness is for all. He swallowed sharply and nodded. Yes, Lord Friar. Salus smiled. Truly this time. Would you like a blessing, my son? The ensign nodded quickly. Yes, my lord, yes. He quickly went to one knee. Salus stood over him. He looked down sadly before holding his hands over the ensign, blessing him in the name of the god the ensign believed in, letting the cracks show, but hiding them with well-worn method, like an old leather coat sliding into something familiar. He helped the boy up, and then held out his captain's insignia and medals for the ensign to take. He gaped, My lord, I can't. Salus shook his head softly. I have no more use for them, please. And think upon what I have told you, and always remember our Lord forgives. With shaking hands, he reached up and took the trinket. He held it close to his chest. Thank you, my lord, thank you. He rushed off, probably to show it to his friends, hold his trophy high, and declare to all that he was the heir to the captaincy of the greatest destroyer in the history of a shattered empire built on faded parchment. Salus turned back to the mirror, looking down at his coat, at where the insignia had been, and saw the fresh cloth beneath. Everywhere else was faded and worn down by time, but beneath that insignia was a fresh patch of cloth never touched and never worn, kept intact by the breadth of metals and that golden cross. His heart rose then, and he almost felt like a new man, felt the surge of life in himself once again. Perhaps he could do this secret mission, this new ship and her new captain, ready to face the beyond. A red light blinked on the intercom. Salus sighed, knowing who it was. He reached over and clicked the box. Salus, came the voice he dreaded. Yes, father, Salus said. Not a real father, but a priest of the church. Still steeped in classic address, the empire kept its old ways. They had been good enough for the church, and they would be good enough for the empire. It was the way of things. We have little time. We must bless this ship before we leave it. The Lord of Blood commands it. Salus's hands went to his breast and touched the fresh spot. I seem to have misplaced my uniform, father, he stammered. There was a chuckle at the other end. The Lord of Blood calls us to different service now, my old friend. We are in the service of the Holy Order again. The Navy serves us. We do not serve it. Salus swallowed. Yes, of course, father. Forgive me. Forgiven, my son. Now be quick and do not forget the case. The line went dead, and Salus let out a slow sigh. He turned back to the mirror and looked into it again. His face had seemed to age 1,000 years in that instant. He lost track of himself, and just let himself get lost in that image. He remembered the battles. He remembered the sacrifices. He remembered it all. He was tired now, and he was ready to be done. But there was no end to the service in the Lord of Blood. He finished undoing the coat and let it hang open. He peeled it from himself and simply stood there, letting the coolness flow over him. He closed his eyes and tried to forget who he was. But he could not. Salus bundled up the uniform and went to the disposal. He pulled open the small door and slid the coat inside and activated it. The device beeped angrily in quick succession before a sudden blast of heat rolled around the edge of the disposal's small door. The uniform was burned whole, and it turned to ashes, which were quickly sucked away into space. Salus imagined the progress of the uniform, the gold threads and the blue fabrics from when it was first laid upon him, those battles he had worn it in, wearing the sigil proudly, to now, when a blast of heat turned his former life to ash and sucked it through the bowels of a ship to mingle with other waste before finally being expelled out into the depths of space. All but the buttons, which had blackened and scorched and lay uselessly on the grating of the disposal. He ignored them and lifted his friar's robe from the bed, and taking a moment to consider his life as a friar of the cloth. The robe was simple wool, with no gold and no ornamentation. He slid it on, and for the first time it felt right. He lost the feelings of claustrophobia and let himself just breathe in the robe before tightening the sash around his waist. He looked at himself in the mirror one last time, letting his eyes wander over and inspect himself before he turned on his heels and looked down at the case. The old leather, the handle, it all was too simplistic, too old age for what it carried, all an elaborate game. "Now hear this, now hear this. Make ready for port. Message repeats. Now hear this, now hear this." Sailor sighed, and taking a tight hold of the case, he lifted it over the bulkhead and started through the ship. Moving deliberately, he stopped at a window and looked out into space. He saw the planet they were heading for, watched the rotation and the spin of its clouds, an angry gas giant at the edge of the Empire, a monster hiding a prize, hiding a gift, and hiding Salus's hope for the future. He watched the billowing clouds and remembered the oceans of his home, and when he'd nearly drowned, his stomach rose in his throat, and he had to will it back down. The friar steeled himself, and turning away from the future, feeling the clanging of the deck plates beneath his feet as he moved, counting the steps, thinking to all those times he walked a deck and felt his feet growing heavier and heavier as he went to find Father Jonas. He had left the scorch-cold buttons of his uniform behind.